Jake Carter wiped sweat from his brow as he rummaged through the remains of an old cargo freighter on the edge of the colony. The station had been abandoned for years, a husk floating silently in orbit, but it was a goldmine for spare parts. For a mechanic like Jake, these salvages kept him afloat. He moved carefully, his flashlight cutting through the dim corridors. The air was stale, and the only sounds were the hum of his breathing through his oxygen mask and the occasional creak of the station's structure. Most of the rooms were empty, stripped clean by scavengers long ago. But Jake's gut told him there was something worth finding. Turning a corner, he froze. A faint sound, soft and trembling, reached his ears. It wasn't the usual groans of the old metal. It was crying. Jake followed the noise, his heart racing. In a small storage compartment, huddled together under a ragged thermal blanket, were two small figures. His flashlight revealed their unusual appearance. Skin tinted a pale, iridescent blue, and large, glowing eyes that stared up at him with a mix of fear and desperation. They were children, no older than 6 or 7 by human standards, and clearly not human. "Whoa," Jake muttered, lowering himself to their level. "Hey there. It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." The twins clung to each other tightly, their thin frames trembling. One of them, the braver of the two, looked Jake directly in the eyes. "Please, don't take us back," the child whispered in a language Jake didn't recognize, but somehow understood. Jake's heart twisted. "Take you back? Back where?" "To the ones who hurt us," the child said, their voice barely audible. "We escaped." Jake glanced around the room, his mind racing. It was clear these kids had been through something terrible. Their clothes were tattered, and they looked malnourished. He had no idea where they'd come from or how they'd survived here. But one thing was certain, he couldn't leave them. "All right," Jake said, his voice soft but firm. "You're safe now. I'm gonna get you out of here." The braver twin hesitated, then nodded, while the other continued to cling to their sibling. Jake carefully scooped them both into his arms, their small forms lighter than he expected. They flinched at first, but as he carried them through the corridors, their grip on him tightened, as if he were their lifeline. As Jake reached his ship and secured them in the cabin, questions filled his mind. Who were these children? Why were they here? And what had they escaped from? For now, none of that mattered. As the ship's engines roared to life and they left the derelict station behind, Jake glanced back at the twins, who had finally fallen asleep. "I don't know what you've been through," he murmured, "but I promise no one's hurting you again." Little did he know his decision to save them would change his life. And theirs, forever. Jake's small workshop on the edge of the colony was a far cry from luxury, but it was home. As he carried the sleeping twins into the living quarters, he couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. They were so fragile, their blue skin and shimmering hair catching the faint light of the room. Jake set them gently on the old couch, covering them with a warm blanket. He sat at the nearby table, running his hands through his hair. "Aliens," he muttered. "Adopting alien kids wasn't exactly on my to-do list." The next morning, Jake awoke to soft whispers. He peeked into the living room and saw the twins sitting upright, wide-eyed, and huddled together. They stopped talking when they noticed him, their large, glowing eyes watching his every move. "Morning," Jake said, his voice softer than usual. He held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "How are you feeling?" The braver twin, the one who had spoken before, answered cautiously. "Better, but scared." Jake grabbed some fruit from his small kitchen and brought it to them. "Here, eat. You need your strength." The shyer twin hesitated, but the braver one took a piece, sniffed it, and took a cautious bite. After a moment, they nodded, and both began eating ravenously. Jake couldn't help but smile. "So, what's your names?" he asked. The braver one paused, looking at the shy twin before answering. "I'm Errol. This is my sister, Mira." "Nice to meet you, Errol and Mira. "I'm Jake," he said, trying to put them at ease. "You're safe here, okay? No one's gonna hurt you." Mira looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "You promise?" Jake crouched down to their level, meeting her gaze. "I promise. Cross my heart." Errol nodded, but his expression remained cautious. "Why are you helping us? Most humans don't." Jake sighed, leaning back against the wall. "Because it's the right thing to do. Doesn't matter if you're human or alien. No kid deserves to go through whatever you've been through." Errol and Mira exchanged a look, their guarded expressions softening slightly. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a start. Over the next few days, Jake worked to make them comfortable. He scavenged clothes from his old supplies, taught them how to use basic human tools, and even managed to coax a laugh out of Mira with his terrible jokes. But the mystery of their past loomed large. Whenever Jake tried to ask where they'd come from, Errol would shut down, his face clouded with fear. Mira would cling to him, her small hands trembling. Jake decided not to push. They'd tell him when they were ready. Late one night, as the twins slept peacefully for the first time since arriving, Jake sat outside under the stars. He looked up at the vast sky, a sense of unease settling in his chest. Whatever these kids were running from, it wasn't over, and Jake had a feeling it was coming straight for them. A week had passed since Jake brought Errol and Mira into his home. The twins were starting to settle in, though they still carried an air of caution. Mira would follow Errol everywhere, her small hand always clutching his, while Errol kept a watchful eye on the door, as if expecting danger to burst through at any moment. Jake was in the garage, tinkering with an old engine, when he heard Mira's soft voice behind him. "What are you doing?" He turned and smiled. Mira stood in the doorway, her glowing blue eyes wide with curiosity. Errol lingered behind her, arms crossed, but clearly just as interested. "Fixing this old beauty," Jake replied, wiping grease off his hands. "It's an engine for a hovercraft. Not as fancy as the ships you've seen, I bet, but it gets the job done." Mira stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the machinery. "Can I see?" Jake gestured for her to come over. "Sure thing. Just don't touch anything sharp." Mira crouched next to him, her small hands hovering over the tools. Errol joined a moment later, still wary but unable to resist his own curiosity. "Where did you learn this?" Errol asked, his voice steady but cautious. "Military," Jake said, tightening a bolt. "Used to work on all kinds of machines before I left. Now, I fix stuff for people around the colony." Mira tilted her head. "Why did you leave?" Jake hesitated, his hand stilling for a moment. "Didn't like what I was being told to do. Sometimes, following orders isn't the right thing." He glanced at them. "I guess you two know what I mean." Errol stiffened, and Mira's eyes dropped to the floor. Jake immediately regretted saying it. He set his tools down and sat back, giving them space. "You don't have to tell me anything," Jake said gently. "But if you ever want to talk, I'm here." For a long moment, the twins were silent. Then, Errol spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were taken from our home." Jake's chest tightened, but he stayed quiet, letting Errol continue. "Our parents, they tried to protect us, but the soldiers came. They said we were valuable." Errol's hands clenched into fists. "We escaped before they could take us to their leader. That's all I know." Mira buried her face in her brother's side, trembling. "They hurt people. They wanted us to do things." Jake felt a surge of anger, but kept it in check. "You don't have to say more," he said softly. "What matters is you're safe now." Errol looked at him, his gaze heavy with something close to gratitude. "For how long? They'll come for us." "Let them try," Jake said, his voice firm. "I'll keep you safe. No one's taking you from me." As the twins stared at him, a faint flicker of trust lit their eyes. Jake knew he didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let these kids face their nightmares alone. The twins had begun to relax around Jake, laughing softly at his jokes and even helping him with small tasks in the garage. Their bond with him was growing stronger, but an unspoken tension lingered in the air. They all knew that their safety was fragile, like a house of cards waiting for the slightest gust to bring it down. One quiet evening, Jake was teaching Arel and Mira how to use basic tools when a faint hum broke the silence. Jake froze, his instincts kicking in. The sound was unmistakable. An approaching ship. "What's that?" Arel asked, his voice laced with fear. Jake stood, his eyes narrowing as he grabbed a pair of binoculars and stepped outside. In the twilight sky, a sleek black ship descended, its engines emitting a low, menacing growl. It landed just beyond the workshop, dust swirling in its wake. "Stay inside," Jake said firmly, glancing back at the twins. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." "But," Mira began, her eyes wide. "Now," Jake said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The twins obeyed, retreating into the workshop. Jake grabbed a small blaster from his toolbox and holstered it at his side before walking toward the ship, his heart pounding. As much as he wanted to avoid trouble, he had a sinking feeling it had found him anyway. The ship's ramp lowered with a hiss, and 3 figures emerged. They were tall, clad in dark armor that glinted in the fading light. Their helmets obscured their faces, but their movements were deliberate, confident. One of them stepped forward, his voice cold and mechanical through the helmet's modulator. "Human, we are looking for 2 fugitives. Hand them over, and we will leave you in peace." Jake crossed his arms, forcing himself to appear calm. "Don't know what you're talking about. No fugitives here." The lead figure tilted his head slightly, as if studying him. "Do not play games. We know they were last seen near this area. They are valuable assets, and we will retrieve them, alive or dead." Jake's jaw tightened. "I told you, no fugitives here. You've got the wrong place." The figure took a step closer, towering over Jake. "Do not test our patience, human. Where are the twins?" Jake's fingers itched to reach for his blaster, but he knew he was outnumbered. He had to buy time. "Twins? Sounds like you're chasing ghosts." The figure raised a hand, signaling to the others. One of them moved toward the workshop, and Jake's heart raced. "Stop," he barked, stepping in front of the path. "This is private property." The lead figure grabbed Jake by the collar, lifting him off the ground effortlessly. "You are lying. Perhaps a lesson will loosen your tongue." As Jake struggled, he glanced toward the workshop, where Errol peeked through a crack in the door. Their eyes met, and Jake silently mouthed, "Stay hidden." The lead figure's grip tightened. "Where are they?" he demanded. Jake's voice was steady, defiant. "Go to hell." The figure's response was a low growl. Jake knew things were about to get worse. Errol peeked through the crack in the workshop door, his heart pounding as he watched the tall, armored figure lift Jake off the ground like a rag doll. Jake struggled but didn't give anything away. Arel could see the determination in his eyes. Jake was protecting them. Mira tugged on Errol's sleeve, her voice trembling. "What do we do? They're going to hurt him." Errol clenched his fists, his mind racing. They couldn't stay hidden forever, not while Jake was in danger. He turned to Mira, his voice steady but urgent. "Stay here. Don't come out no matter what." "But," she began, her glowing blue eyes filling with tears. "I'll be fine," he said, gripping her shoulders. "I promise." Before she could argue, Arel slipped out of the workshop, leaving the door ajar just enough to sneak back in if needed. He stepped into the fading light, his small frame barely noticeable at first. The wind carried dust and tension as he took a deep breath and shouted, "Stop." The lead figure froze, his helmet tilting toward the sound. Jake turned his head, his eyes widening in alarm. "Arel, no, go back inside." But Arel didn't move. He walked forward, his chin high, trying to mask the fear coursing through him. Let him go. I'm the one you want. The armored figure dropped Jake, who collapsed to the ground, coughing. The figure turned to Arl, its red visor glowing ominously. Wise decision, child. Your cooperation will make this easier. Jake staggered to his feet, putting himself between Arl and the intruders. You're not taking him anywhere, he growled, reaching for his blaster. The figure raised a hand, and one of the others fired a warning shot, hitting the ground near Jake's feet. Do not interfere, human. You've done enough. Jake's hand hovered over his blaster, his teeth clenched. Arel, get back inside. But Arel stood firm. No. If I go, they'll leave you and Mira alone. The lead figure chuckled darkly. Perhaps the boy is smarter than you, human. Arel took another step forward, his hands trembling but steady. Promise me you won't hurt them. The figure seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. Very well. We have no interest in the others. Arel, don't do this, Jake yelled, his voice raw with desperation. It's okay, Arel said, looking back at him. You took care of us. Now it's my turn. Jake's stomach twisted as he watched Arel approach the soldiers. He couldn't let this happen. Not after everything they'd been through. Summoning his strength, he lunged forward, grabbing the lead figure's arm and twisting it sharply. Run, Arel, Jake shouted. Chaos erupted. The soldiers turned their weapons on Jake, but before they could fire, a deafening roar split the air. From the horizon, a sleek, silver ship descended rapidly, its weapons glowing with energy. The soldiers hesitated, their leader barking orders to regroup. Arel froze, his eyes fixed on the ship. Somehow, he knew what it was, and who was inside. The hum of the descending silver ship filled the air, its sleek design shimmering under the fading sunlight. The soldiers turned their attention to the new arrival, their weapons raised in defense. Jake grabbed Arel's arm and pulled him back toward the workshop, his heart pounding. Stay behind me, Jake whispered, gripping his blaster tightly. He wasn't sure who was aboard the ship, but he wasn't taking any chances. The lead soldier barked orders. Fall back. Defensive formation. The ship landed smoothly, its ramp lowering with a soft hiss. For a moment, the air was still, the tension so thick that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then a figure emerged, a tall alien clad in intricate robes, their posture regal and commanding. Their skin shimmered with the same pale blue glow as Arel and Mira's, and their piercing silver eyes scanned the scene with calm authority. Stand down, the figure said, their voice resonating with power. The soldiers hesitated, their leader stepping forward. This is none of your concern, he said, his tone sharp but edged with caution. We are retrieving valuable assets. The alien's gaze hardened. These children are not assets. They are the heirs to the throne of Salith, and you will not touch them. Jake's jaw dropped as he looked at Arel, who stood frozen, his wide eyes fixed on the figure. Heirs to the throne, Jake whispered. Arel didn't answer, his expression a mix of fear and recognition. The lead soldier sneered. Salith is gone. Its throne means nothing. The alien raised a hand, and the silver ship's weapons began to glow ominously. You are wrong. Salith lives through its people, and I will not allow you to harm what remains. The soldiers faltered, the power shift palpable. Their leader growled, signaling a retreat. This isn't over. As the soldiers scrambled back to their ship, Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him, but his grip on Arel's arm didn't loosen until the enemy vessel disappeared into the sky. The regal alien turned to Jake, their expression softening. You protected them, they said, stepping closer. For that, I am in your debt. Jake blinked, his brain still catching up. Sure. But can someone explain what's going on? Heirs. Thrones. I thought they were just kids. They are, the alien said, kneeling in front of Arel and Mira, who had emerged cautiously from the workshop. but they are also the last of Salith's royal bloodline. My name is Thaurin, and I am their guardian." Errol clutched Mira's hand, his voice trembling. You're real. We thought everyone was gone." Thaurin placed a hand on Errol's shoulder. "You are not alone anymore. We will rebuild together." Jake crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "That's great and all, but what happens now? Those soldiers aren't going to give up." Thaurin stood, their gaze meeting Jake's. "Then we fight, together." Jake sighed, glancing at the twins. "Guess I'm not going anywhere, am I?" Mira smiled faintly, and Errol nodded. For the first time, they looked hopeful. The once quiet workshop buzzed with energy as Jake, Thaurin, and the twins worked to prepare for the inevitable return of the soldiers. Thaurin had activated a hidden compartment in their sleek ship, revealing advanced weaponry and shields that Jake could only describe as next-level sci-fi tech. Jake's mechanic brain couldn't help but marvel at the craftsmanship, even as the stakes grew higher. "These are plasma shields," Thaurin explained, handing Jake a small, glowing disc. "Activate it when under fire. It will deflect most energy-based weapons." Jake turned the disc over in his hands, his brow furrowed. "Most? That's reassuring." Thaurin's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Your courage will carry you where the shields cannot." Jake snorted. "Great. Guess I'm upgrading from fixing engines to saving alien royalty." Nearby, Arel and Mira were busy helping set up a perimeter defense. Thaurin had given them small wrist devices that emitted faint holograms as they keyed in commands. Despite their young age, they worked with surprising focus, their expressions determined. Jake crouched next to Arel, watching him adjust the device. "You've done this before?" he asked. Arel nodded without looking up. "Our parents taught us." "Before." His voice trailed off, and his hands trembled slightly. Jake rested a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, you're doing great. We're gonna get through this." Arel glanced up at him, his glowing eyes filled with both fear and gratitude. "Thanks, Jake." As night fell, the team gathered in the workshop, which now looked more like a command center. Thaurin activated a holographic map showing the surrounding area. "The soldiers will return soon. Their ship likely sent a distress signal. Reinforcements are coming." Jake rubbed his temples. "Of course they are. Any chance we can just run?" Thaurin shook their head. "They will track the twins wherever they go. The only way to ensure their safety is to face the threat head-on." Errol stepped forward, his small frame radiating determination. "We can help. We're not just kids." Thaurin smiled warmly. "You are more than that, Errol. You are heirs to a legacy of resilience, and with our combined strength, we will prevail." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, I'm in. But I'm just a mechanic, not a soldier. Don't expect me to pull off any heroics." Mira piped up, her voice quiet but firm. "You already did, Jake. You saved us." Her words hit harder than Jake expected. He straightened, nodding. "Then I guess I'll keep saving you." The workshop fell silent for a moment, the weight of the coming battle settling over them. Outside, the night was eerily still, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Thaurin broke the silence, their voice steady. "When they come, we will stand as one, and we will not falter." Jake gripped his blaster, his resolve hardening. "Let's show them what we're made of." The twins nodded, their fear replaced by a quiet determination. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The morning sky glowed with shades of orange and purple as the faint hum of approaching ships echoed across the horizon. Jake stood at the edge of the workshop, his blaster in hand and his heart pounding like a drum. Thaurin, tall and imposing, stood beside him, their silver eyes scanning the distance with calm precision. Behind them, Arel and Mira waited, their wrist devices glowing softly as they monitored the perimeter defenses. Despite their young age, the twins carried themselves with a quiet determination that reminded Jake of seasoned soldiers. He couldn't help but feel a swell of pride and worry. "Here they come," Thaurin said, pointing toward 3 black ships streaking through the sky. Their engines roared as they descended, kicking up a storm of dust as they landed just beyond the property line. Jake swallowed hard. Great. They'd brought friends. The lead ship's ramp lowered with a hiss, and soldiers poured out in formation, their dark armor glinting in the morning light. At the center stood the same leader from before, his red visor glowing ominously. This time, however, he was accompanied by an even larger figure, an alien with sharp, jagged armor and a menacing aura. "Thaurin," Jake said, his voice low, "please tell me you've got a plan." Thaurin stepped forward, their voice firm. "We hold the line. Together." The soldiers advanced, their weapons raised. Jake took a deep breath, gripping his blaster tightly. "Here we go." The first wave of enemy fire was met by the twins' perimeter defenses. Energy shields flared to life, deflecting the blasts and forcing the soldiers to reposition. Jake fired back, his shots precise despite his nerves. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew how to aim. Thaurin unleashed a wave of silver energy, their movements fluid and precise. The larger, armored alien roared in response, charging toward them with a massive energy blade. Thaurin met the attack head-on, their strength and agility matching the brute force of their opponent. Jake covered the twins, shooting at any soldier who got too close. "How you two holding up?" he called over his shoulder. "We're fine," Arel shouted, his hands flying across the controls of his wrist device. Activating the secondary shield, a shimmering dome of energy surrounded the workshop, buying them precious time. Mira knelt beside him, her glowing eyes focused on her own device. "I'm boosting the shield's strength." The battle raged on, chaos engulfing the once quiet land. Despite the odds, Jake, Thaurin, and the twins held their ground. When Thaurin finally struck down the armored alien with a decisive blow, the enemy forces hesitated. "Retreat," the lead soldier barked, his voice filled with frustration. The remaining troops scrambled back to their ships, leaving the battlefield littered with scorched ground and broken weapons. As the last enemy ship disappeared into the sky, silence fell. Jake dropped to one knee, breathing heavily. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Thaurin approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You fought bravely, Jake. They will not return so easily." The twins ran to him, their faces alight with relief and gratitude. "You saved us again," Mira said, hugging him tightly. Jake smiled, ruffling her hair. "We saved each other." Thaurin knelt beside Arel and Mira, their expressions soft. "You are not just heirs. You are leaders. Today, you proved your strength." Jake looked at the 3 of them, his makeshift family. "So, what now?" Thaurin stood, their gaze lifting to the horizon. "Now we rebuild. Together, we will create a future where they can't touch us." Jake nodded, standing tall despite his exhaustion. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The end.